Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome if you're watching from afar, and welcome to all the friends assembled here in St Mary's Perivale in West London. Great to have you all, whether you're here or whether you're afar. We have a special event this afternoon. Instead of our usual concert, of which we have about 130 a year, we have a talk all about pianos. I'd never seen one of these talks before. And I've heard Michael Lewis, my great friend who's going to come and talk to you, give a previous version of his talk, and I was fascinated. And I've been involved in pianos for about 65 years, and I learned a lot. I think you will too. Michael has been sorting out pianos at my house for 30 years and here for nearly 20 years since we bought this piano in 2003. Since when? There have been 1,100 concerts. It's been played by 400 pianists. I'd say again, 400 pianists, over 1,000 recitals. It must have had 20 Liszt sonatas, about 10 Hammerklaviers. Actually, the piece played most is Chopin's G minor ballade. I think that must have been played about 50 times. So the thing has taken it very well, and it's huge credit to Michael that this Yamaha has served us so well, and all the pianists coming, and we have world-class pianists like the winner of the Leeds who's coming in 48 hours time. They all rave about it, and that's because of Michael's supreme skill, and I'm incredibly indebted to him. Before he comes on to talk to us, I'd like to say a big thank you to our technical team, because actually broadcasting so that you can see the picture and yet the audience at home can see the picture. It's quite complicated. As you can imagine, we've had to do quite a lot of fiddling around, but lectures are a nice change from our usual fare, as you'll find. So I'm very grateful to George Auckland at the back, who's set up all this kit, and Roger Nellis upstairs, who's doing the recording. So that's it. It gives me huge pleasure to welcome Michael to talk to us. Let's have a big round of applause, please.
Thank you to Hugh. That was a very, very nice introduction, and I'm grateful. So, welcome to St Mary's, and my name is Michael Lewis, as I've just been introduced, and I've been tuning pianos for 46 years, and I'm just beginning to get the hang of it now. So, I studied in the early 70s. I went to what was then the London College of Furniture, and did a short course in basic piano tuning and piano technology. And then in 1975, I got a call asking from me to tune a piano at the Lewisham Town Hall. And it was a last-minute thing. And I got down there, and the manager said, "You've got half an hour to get this piano sorted out." Now, this was my first paid thing, so you can imagine I was almost as nervous as I am right now. Anyway, I've been asked to give a talk on how pianos basically work and how they're tuned as well. So this is, as Hugh has just described, this is a modern example of a modern piano. It's a Yamaha that I've been looking after for nearly 20 years here, where we've had some absolutely fantastic musicians and concerts over that period. It's been quite amazing. So this is a modern piano, but it's easy to take things for granted. Like, we know pianos are in concert halls, pianos are in schools, pianos are at home. But if we cast our minds back to about the year 1700, there were no pianos. And the keyboard of the day was basically the harpsichord. Now, the harpsichord was a strung instrument, a keyboard instrument that was used to accompany cellos and violins and sonatas. But the problem with the harpsichord is that when you press a note down, a little jack, which is a piece of wood about that long with a piece of plectra in it, which is actually, in those days, was made out of bird's quill. It went past the string and it plucked the string. So that's how it works. But the thing about it is you can't play soft and loud. Even if you press the note harder, it doesn't make the slightest bit of difference. Now, in or around about 1700 in Italy, a man called Bartolomeo Cristofori looked at this and thought, I'm going to take the jack out of the harpsichord and I'm going to make a little hammer and cover it with some doeskin. And he got that to work, and lo and behold, this was quite a revolution, because you could actually play a note softly and then play it harder, and you would get a louder sound. Now we take all this for granted now, but in those days it made an enormous difference. Now, funnily enough, the piano didn't really take off until the middle of that century, when people like Mozart obviously started really composing piano concertos. And then the piano had really quite a bit of development over the next 100 years or so. In the Industrial Revolution, strings became thicker and you got more tension. Hammers became thicker, and I might as well just show you. That is actually a hammer assembly of a modern upright piano, but this is the core of the wood of the hammer, which is covered with felt. Now, in the early pianos, obviously, this wasn't felt; it was just a kind of leather. So the way a piano hammer is made is that, imagine that you have got no felt on the top, and the felt, which is made of strands of wool and specially treated, is compressed into a pyramidal shape or triangular shape, and it comes in a block. So it might be a block of felt like that, and one point is put onto to the top of the point of the actual core of the wood of the hammer, and the one side is pulled down and glued and riveted. You probably can't see that, but there's a little rivet in there. And the same thing on the other side, so that pulls that down there. And then a special machine comes and clamps it and keeps it in position. And then a cutting machine comes along and cuts each individual hammer into position so that you can screw it onto the action. So the piano has taken quite a long time to develop. And what I'd like to do now is to show you some photos of an action. Now, this is what goes on inside the piano. This is a photo of an upright piano, and you can see the string is there, it's vertical, and this is the damper, and that's the hammer, and this is the key. I've been told to move this around to the camera. This is the key, so when you press this note down, this end of the key pushes up the lever here. This is the lever. I think maybe I'll try to point with something so I don't get my hand in the way. And the lever pushes up the jack, and the jack pushes up what I've just showed you, which is the hammerhead, and it strikes the string. So if anybody wants to come up, by the way, afterwards and have a look at my tools or anything about this and ask any questions, you'll be most welcome. Now, in a grand piano, it's different because the mechanism is different. The hammer is coming up to the string and striking from underneath the string. Again, you press down the key, and the capstan, which we call the capstan here, pushes up this lever, and this is what it pushes up. That lever here is actually one of those, and it's called a repetition lever. And so there's quite a lot going on there. The back of the key pulls up the damper body, and it pushes the damper rod, and here's the damper sitting on top of the string. And the damper is made of wood with some felt on, so when you press the key down, the hammer strikes the string, and the sound continues until you take your finger off the key, and the damper comes down again. Now, I get a very dry throat, so I've got 2 special cups of St. Mary's water here. Apparently, it's especially from the medieval hole. Right, so that gave you just a little bit of a taster. It's quite complicated, obviously, and would take much more time than we've got this afternoon. So anyway, I'm going to take the action and keys out of the piano, and to do that first I have to take the keyboard lid off. Now, in the trade, we call this the fall, because it falls on your fingers. But, well, it can do, but on this particular piano, I don't know whether you can see that. If I take my hands away, it goes down slowly. So the children won't break their fingers on that. And then on this particular piano, it comes out quite easily, if you know what you're doing, which I'm not quite sure that I am. Right. Each side of the keyboard are the keyboard cheek blocks. Now, these are very important because these are screwed down from underneath the piano. It's very important because this keeps the position of the keys and the action and the hammers, because if you don't have a very, very precise position, the point called the striking point, the point where the hammer comes up to hit the string, will be affected, and it actually will make a big difference to the tonal quality, especially in the top 2 octaves. So those are very important. And the other thing is, when you press the left-hand pedal, the whole of the action and keys shift to the right. And so that shifting movement has got to be very, very precise. I take this out, and this is the key slip, because it slips in front of the keys. And now I'm going to shut the lid and put my little protective piece of material so that Mrs. Jones doesn't get her piano all scratched at the top, or on the top. And then getting the whole thing out, you have to be very, very careful, because if you touch a key, the hammer will go up and it'll snap off underneath the bulkhead of the piano. So one has to be very careful of that. It's very delicate and very heavy. So all of this bit here, this bit of the mechanism, we call the action in the trade. And the action is screwed down onto the key. Now, the key comes off individually. This is actually from an upright piano. But there's an axis here. And on the back of the key of a grand piano, you've got this piece here, which is called the check. So when you press a note, the hammer goes up to the strings, and I don't know whether you can see that, but it's just dropping back. And that's called the set-off. Now, if you didn't have a set-off, the hammer would continue to the string and just block on the string. So you have to have a mechanism whereby the hammer goes up to the string and drops back at a very precise moment. The whole geometry of a piano action is very, very precise. And all the parts have specific measurements where they should be. For instance, the hammer at rest, the top of the hammer, should be approximately 47 millimeters from the underside of the string. Now, if that's completely wrong, then it won't work. So I think you can just about see how the lever, which is here, so this represents the lever here, and the lever comes up, and this is the jack, and it pushes the underside of this part here. This is the hammer head, this is the shank, this is the roller, and this is the flange. And this little screw here, actually, you can control how far back the hammer drops from its point when it sets off. And all these measurements are very, very important, and we have lots of tools with which to do this work. Now, while I'm doing this, I'm just going to take a hammer off and just explain something about toning. Now, toning is something that you can do to a piano to actually change its volume and also to change its timbre or quality of tone. So if you have a piano that sounds really, really loud and raucous and brittle, you can change that. You can get your piano tuner to change it. And the way you change it is by sticking needles into the hammer felt. So you're actually, this is one of my tools for sticking needles. It's a needle holder. And you push the needles into the hammers, and it actually changes the tonal quality and the volume. Now this is a much more expensive, rather lethal looking thing. Don't get your fingers in there. It's got 4 needles, and this is specifically for doing the sides of the hammerhead. It fits over like this, and then you squeeze the lever and the needles go in, and you can get right inside the hammer felt to tone it. Where with this you can't really go from the sides without damaging it. This is specifically for that, designed specifically for that purpose. So that's how hammers are toned. So you can change the tone of a piano. Screw this back on so that the next pianist doesn't have notes missing. And I'm going to put this back in now because I want to talk a bit about the construction of the piano. So one has to be careful again. It's very, very heavy, but very, very delicate. And I practiced this a few times before we started, just so that I got used to it. And then I have to look at the hammer line to make sure none of the hammers are up. Otherwise, when I push it back in, the hammers will all snap off, and that won't be a very good idea. Right, take my little protection off. Right, I'm going to open the lid now. And I hope that you can see into the piano. I don't know which cameras we've got up, but you can see, well, I hope you can see, that there are, these are the tuning pins. The tuning pin is about that long, and it goes into the piano. There's, underneath the plate, there is a piece of wood, and the tuning pins go into that wood. Now, when I say the plate, I mean the iron frame. And now you can see, I'll just get something I'll point with this. The iron frame goes right from the back of the piano all the way to the front. In the early pianos, you didn't have any struts or any iron plates. But as through the Industrial Revolution and the development of the piano, the strings got thicker and the tension of the piano got much, much greater. In order not to have the whole piano case pulling back at you and getting, sort of getting pulled out, you had to have struts. So there will be maybe one strut there, another one there, to hold things together and to keep the tension of the string. But over a period of time, piano manufacturers decided that they would just make a complete cast iron frame, which is made in a foundry. And these frames are incredibly strong. You can put a lot of tension and poundage on it, but they're very brittle. So if you drop them on the concrete floor, they'll break into several pieces. So here you can see the bridge, the main bridge carrying all the strings, all the steel strings, and then in the bass, you can see the bass strings and the bass bridge. And the bass strings are copper wound, and they go to a separate bridge because what you're trying to do is to get a longer string, but the bridge must be nearer the middle of the soundboard. Now the soundboard is what you're, you can't see it on the thing very well, but it's all this wood underneath the strings and underneath the plate. And if I press the pedal, you can see all the dampers going up at the same time. And the thing about the dampers is that it gives you extra resonance. If you play a chord, those particular notes are held by those particular dampers. But if you put all the dampers down, you've got this massive amount of sympathetic vibration, which gives the piano its wonderful ability to build up. Now, talking about strings for a minute, this is a modern high tensile steel string. And the way the piano is strung is that this string goes through the hole in the pin. And then, I'm not going to do it now, but the string is bent around and made into a coil. And you can see all the tuning pins here with their coils on. The modern piano doesn't have any dampers in the top octave or two. And I'll tell you a funny story, because many years ago there was a lady who called me, and she said, "There's something wrong with my piano." And so I played it, and I couldn't find anything wrong with it at all. And she said, "No, there's a ring there, look. Can't you hear it?" And I said, "No. I can't find anything wrong with it at all." And after a while I realized that what she was talking about is the difference between that note, which happens to be F on this particular piano, which damps, because it's got a damper, and that one, and the rest do not. So she was very worried about this, and she said that at first she said to me, "How long have you been a piano tuner? Can't you hear that?" But in fact, it's quite normal. And the reason for that is to have extra vibration, extra resonance when you play a chord in the lower part of the piano. Just talk amongst yourselves for a minute while I have dry throat problems. Yes, the cross stringing. The bass section is cross-strung to get the most length, but they're copper wound, these strings. In this particular instrument, we've got about half of the bass section is 2 strings to 1 note, and then in the very bottom octave, it's 1 string to 1 note. And the cross-stringing came in quite a long time ago, about 100 years ago, because you can get the bass bridge to be nearer the soundboard, which is concave and acts as a kind of diaphragm. Now, just quickly on the pedals, the left-hand pedal actually shifts the whole of the action to the right. And the idea about that is so that the hammer will only hit 2 out of the 3 strings. It's called the unicorda, so because there's 1 string is not being struck. And it makes 2 things. It makes it softer, but also it gives a different quality of sound. There's lots more to it, I can assure you, but I'm having to keep it simple and fairly brief. Now, I'd like to go on to how pianos are tuned, which is a very big mystery to a lot of people. Now, can I ask you to imagine it's the Albert Hall, and there's a concerto on, and the pianist comes along, and the piano tuner comes along, and the piano tuner tunes the piano, and the pianist tries it, and he says, "Oh yeah, that's fine, it's all in tune." Well, strictly speaking, it's not in tune at all. Now, I want you to imagine a pond, absolutely still pond. Drop a stone in it, what happens? Ripples, waves. Now, when I speak, or when a musical instrument is played, or any noise at all, exactly the same thing happens in the air. So if I'm here and I talk or sing to the wall, it moves the air in waves. So I want you to imagine that there are 2 constant sounds at the same note, the same pitch. And let's go for middle C on the piano, because most people know what middle C on the piano is. So you've got these 2 sounds at middle C, and because the crests of the waves, because they're the same, they're in unison, and they hit the wall and come back at you at exactly the same time. Now, if I increase the pitch, make it higher of the second one while the first source is stable, what happens is that the waves go to the wall at a different speed. And as the first one comes back quicker, it will cancel out the one that's going slower. And what you'll actually hear is a decrease in the sound. And then as it goes further, an increase in the sound. And that is what we piano tuners in the trade call beats. Now, the interesting thing is it's a musical and acoustical phenomenon that if I take middle C on the piano, and if I had, like we had against the wall, if we now increase one of those notes that go through C sharp and D, the beat rate will get faster and then slower until it slows down on the minor third. And that is the first concord. Now, I call these notes connected notes. You've got discords and concords within the same octave. And it's quite fascinating that the first concord, which means the first note that can be tuned to middle C in pure tune, will be the E flat, and then the E, which is a major third, because on a basic chord of, let's see, C major, you've got a C and its fifth, and then that's an open sound, so you want to colour it with a major or minor sound. And all these notes are all connected, which means that they will go into tune perfectly. Now, I'm just going to take a moment to demonstrate whether you can hear this from where you are. I don't know. Now, that interval, an interval is the distance between two notes. That interval is a major third. I'm playing A below middle C and F below that. Now that is what we call an equal tempered third. Now that is a pure third, and I don't know whether anybody can hear the difference. It may be too far away. And that is an equally tempered third. So in an ideal world, we would want to try and tune all our concords perfectly in tune so that we made nice sounds. But in fact, we can't do that. Because if we tuned all of those concords, which are the minor third, the major third, the fourth, the fifth, and the minor and major sixes, all in tune within one octave, we'd end up with an octave sounding like that, or not far off. It would be terrible. So the whole of the piano is actually a kind of compromise. Within one octave, we've got to adjust, we've got to stretch and increase and decrease where the real tuning notes are, and it make a massive great compromise so that you can play in all the keys. So when a piano tuner starts tuning the piano, I mean, personally, I start with a tuning fork on that particular A, which is the A above middle C. This is a tuning fork. If you ever do this, always bend your knee, because it will hurt otherwise. I don't know whether you can hear that. I use an electronic one because it's more reliable. And it can go on and you can relax and take your time. The problem with this is that you need 3 hands, so you can stick it in your teeth, but your heartbeat actually interferes with the sound. So the piano tuner, the idea is, as I was saying, I start with that note and I tune between F and F. So my first move is to go from A down to F, which has to beat, which means it has to have 7 vibrations per second. And this, that's a major third, C to E, that has to have 10 vibrations per second. So it's 10 beats, if you like, out of tune. So you have to go through with the fourths, fifths, and thirds within that octave, and you're stretching intervals and by very specific but different amounts. And the speed of each note, the number of beats a piano tuner learns. Now, we go back to the equal tempered interval here. Now that should be 7 beats per second. The thing is, I've been doing it long enough to tell you that whether that one's right, or whether that one's right, or whether that one's right. And then when you've got all your intervals nicely out of tune, but not so bad that you can't play the piano properly, then you tune octaves down and octaves up. And when you get to the very, very top of the piano, a good piano tuner will actually start stretching the octave. Now, you might think that the octave is supposed to be absolutely pure, but in the top of the piano, it's not, because a good tuner will actually make the octave very, very slightly sharp, so that when you play an octave up there, you wouldn't really be able to tell that it's actually not quite in tune. But when you play an arpeggio, that top note sounds right. Now, why do we do that? Because if you listen to a top note here, it's gone within, the sound has gone within, 2 or 3 seconds? And so the human ear hears high notes flat, especially on a piano, which is a strung percussion instrument. So you get a lot of knock, and the actual sustain of the tone is very, very short. And if you don't stretch, you end up playing an arpeggio. It sounds very, very flat at the top. So a good piano tuner will do that. So, as I say, you set all these intervals in the middle of the piano with these specific beat rates that you learn to count. In fact, I personally gave up counting a long time ago. I just count that one, which is A to F, and get that right, and then everything else is relative to it. It's quite a complicated business. Time for another drink. Right, finally, I would like to talk about looking after your piano. Now, I don't know how many people have got a piano at home, but the one thing you should get your piano tuner to do is to check for moth. Now, you might find this unusual, but those little small moths, the ones that you go to the cupboard that you haven't opened for 3 years and find that your jumper's got 10 holes in it, those little ones, they absolutely love the piano because it's full of felts, especially in the mechanism underneath the keys. There are a lot of soft felts, and they lay their eggs, and then sometime later they start to eat. And I haven't got a clue what it is, but there's something in the felt that they love to eat. It's not just it's cozy, but there's some kind of nutrition or something in it. And there was a lady from Clapham who rang me about 10 years ago and said, "My grand piano is clicking." And I took the mechanism out, and I took all the keys out and everything to pieces, and I can promise you that there wasn't one single felt left in that piano. And so obviously, if you press the note down, you're going to hit wood. And I couldn't believe it. I had to replace all the felts except for the hammers, because the hammer, as I said before, is made out of quite a hard material. They love the soft ones. So if you have a piano tuner, now and again, maybe once every couple of years, if you've got a piano, ask him or her to undo the action, take the keys out. You'll probably find an awful lot of dirt underneath the keys because most people don't have them cleaned. And you might find a few moths. I was hoping to find a bit of money. There was a story about, I think it was a few years ago now, and a piano tuner was asked to go to an old piano and tune it, and there was some noise or rattle coming from the bottom of it. Was an upright piano, and it was coming from the bottom of the piano. So he took the bottom, what we call the bottom door, off the bottom of the piano, And in the corner, there was something wrapped up, and it turned out to be golden nuggets. And they took it to a specialist, and they valued it at £100,000. And so the owner of the piano split it with the piano tuner. So, I mean, I'm hoping that something like that, might happen to me one day. I have found a 50 pence piece. I've found a pound. I've found a fiver, and I found a £20 note as well. But that's unfortunate about as far as it's gone. Try not to keep pianos near radiators if you can possibly help it, because radiators make a dry heat, unlike a fire, for instance, which is combustible. So the dry heat in the air is compensated by the moisture in the wood of your piano, and therefore over time the screws will get loose and the wood will split. So if you can try and keep it away from radiators as much as possible, it will be great. And finally, if you want to find a piano tuner, a good one, I would suggest that you Google the PTA, which is the Piano Tuners Association, and then you click on local piano tuners, and you will find a list of people who are registered who have had to do a test in order to get on the register. So they should be reasonably competent. So I think that almost about wraps it up. I thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you found it of some interest. Thank you.
That was superb, Michael. And Michael has agreed to answer any questions from the floor. I'd like to get the ball rolling by saying that all this hearing the beats, it's so complicated and so difficult. The trouble is with your job is that people who don't know anything about it think it's easy.
Pardon?
But I mean, it's very difficult because it's so complicated hearing these beats. I think I hear them, but I don't really. And I think all pianists are slightly mystified by the fact that if the intervals are absolutely perfect, then it doesn't fit, sort of thing. How long do you think it takes from scratch, even if you've got a good ear, as you must have, how long do you think it takes before you can tune a piano really well?
Well, the acoustical side of it, if you study acoustics, and you can get the whole thing within a short time, 2 or 3 months. It's actually the physical side of doing it, which is infinitely more difficult. So the answer to your question here is acoustic study and understanding about beats takes a couple of months, maybe 3 months or something to study, if that. But learning to be a piano tuner and learning to adapt your technique to each individual piano, because it's not just the question of turning the lever. I mean, this is my lever, which is a very nice one, but it's not just a question of turning this pin like that. If you turn it clockwise, the pitch of the string will go up, and vice versa. But it's also learning how to set the string, how to pull it over the bridge, how to maneuver it backwards and forwards so that it stays dead where we want it. Bad tuners come along and just do that and then leave it. It sounds in tune, but after you've played a few chords or after you've put the heating on a bit, it just goes out of tune again because the tuning pin is revolving from its top part because there's a soft metal into the plank. So the answer to the question is to become a really experienced tuner, I would say at least 3 years, depending on how much time you spend on it. And can you
just, before I open it to other people, the A and the F, play a sort of thing perfect tune, and then play it how you want it with the 7 beats and see if we can hear the difference. Oh, I can hear the beat from here now.
Now that is going ba 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 ba.
Do it again.
So if you just first of all listen to A, and then listen to F, and now try to listen to the effect behind the sound. And now I'm going to play a perfect in tune major third. And it's more pure. The sound is stable. It's like it's going like that instead of wobbling.
You know, I've never known that. Does everyone hear the difference? Do it once more, Mike, because I mean, it's fundamental, and this is how all piano tuning's done, and I didn't know before.
Well, this is a major third, and it's a pure third.
Right.
And if you try and listen not to the notes themselves, but to just the effect it has,
it's steady.
It's a steady sound, and it's because those 2 notes, as I said before, they're connected and through the harmonic series. So you can put a major third into perfect tune, but you can't put a minor or major second into tune. And so there is your perfect tuning.
But when you come along, that's not right, because you have to make it slightly imperfect so it all works. That's what
now that's going ba 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 ba. And you have to, this is an example of how you stretch or decrease, depend on the interval. A 5th is a narrow interval, a 4th is a wide interval, etc. And you compromise and you stretch. So, and the idea is so that if you are playing, going through all the different keys like that, that it doesn't sound too out of tune on any one particular key. So that, you know, the key of, say, F sharp major would be totally out of tune if you got all the home keys in tune, like C major, F major, B flat, etc.
And the other thing, before I open it, I never realised the business about tuning the top of the piano slightly sharp. And I must have sat here whilst you've been tuning this piano at least 500 times or something like that. And often I've thought, dear me, that sounds a bit sharp at the top, but I won't say anything. That's totally new on me. Right, now, let's have some questions from other people. I'll bring this round so it goes out. And come on, be brave, put your hand up.
Not too complicated, please, because I know the basics.
Do you want to ask? There you go.
Thank you. That was really interesting. So look at my piano with new eyes.
Thank you.
And when you were saying about the beats that you get, is that partly why things sound different in different keys? When you transpose to a different key, it has a slightly different feel to it.
Well, this is a major third, the one that we've just been talking about, F to A, in the key of F major. Now, that's out of tune by 7 beats per second. This is out of tune by 10 beats per second. So, yes, the answer is that certain keys will have a different feel about them.
Do that one again, Michael.
Da 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 da. Da 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 da.
I'm not sure I heard that one.
This is the first thing you've got to learn if you want to be a piano. If you want to be a piano tuner.
Absolutely fascinating. I'm surprised you didn't say the one practical tip, apart from not too near a radio, is don't put a beer mug on the piano.
Well, I assumed that people wouldn't want to do that.
Any other questions? Julie?
So when a composer has written a piece in E flat, are they aware of these differences in vibrations? In other words, what is the difference between E flat and writing the piece in D? If you transpose it to D, is it going to sound that much different? Is every key that they write in carefully chosen for the vibrations that you're going to get in the different notes?
Right, well, this is a very difficult question to answer. If you go back to, let's say, Mozart and Beethoven's time, you might find that those pianos were not tuned in equal temperament. If you go further back to the time of the harpsichord, for instance, you would have a whole range of different tuning systems. There's Van Biesen, there's Werkmeister, there's all sorts of different tuning systems which allow you to make some keys pure and other keys not so pure. And so in, for instance, Baroque music, you don't necessarily do a lot of changing of key. So you can set your particular type of tuning. You can set where you want your notes. But the answer to your question is that it's a little bit more complicated because this is a modern piano and it's going to give you a different feel than an earlier piano. For instance, if you sit in the bath and you hum, you'll get a note that suddenly the whole bathroom will vibrate because everything has its pitch. Now, in earlier pianos, there were, because of the construction and the wood, you might play E flat. I like E flat as well. It's a good key. And you play the same thing in C sharp and it just doesn't work. It's also to do with fingering, I would imagine. But it's also to do with acoustics and even the tuning of what you were actually playing at the time.
Right, other questions?
You said there's some strings who've got 3 strings to a note. All 3 strings strung at the same note?
Yes. So the question, if you didn't hear that, was about striking the 3 notes at the same time. So you've got, striking the 3 strings at the same time. So you've got 3 strings, in 2/3 of the piano anyway, you've got 3 steel strings for every hammer. And the idea is that those 3 strings are tuned in unison to the same pitch. Well, because if you only had one, if you take one string like this and have a hammer hit the string when it's up to pitch, it's going to sound very thin. So if you have 2, it'll be twice the volume. And if you have 3, it'll be even more. If you have 4, there's not enough room mechanically to actually design a piano with 4 strings normally. So 3 has become the normal thing for modern pianos. And you tune each individual string on that note as best you can so that there are no beats, and that's when the unison is in tune.
Do you think a string player who is instinctively making their own notes and therefore doesn't have to compensate with beats and so on would have to compromise when playing with an equal-tempered piano, even if that's something that's happening instinctively rather than a very conscious adjustment?
Well, that's a very nice and very good question. If you listen to a string quartet playing, let's say 2 violins, viola and cello, what they do is when they play a chord, they try to get all the, as I described it, connected notes in pure tune. And it makes this lovely cohesive sound. And so when you play a string instrument, all you need to do is to change the position of your finger and you can put a note exactly where you want it to be and make that lovely sound. As soon as you get to the piano, you have to compromise. And yes, a good string player or a good string quartet, when it becomes a quintet, when you're playing with a piano, will instinctively listen to the piano and pitch that note. And a really good quintet, you can hear where when they're not playing with the piano, do they actually compensate then? Because the natural thing is to make pure tuning all the time. But yes, they do have to compromise and they have to adapt to the equal temperament of the piano.
String players will say that F sharp doesn't sound the same as G flat.
Well, there's. It depends where you want to put it.
Player, I don't know, biased. Right, any other questions?
Thank you. Yes, I knew someone once who was taught to play the piano by Dame Mara Hess. And when she went to see her, she went into the room and there were two pianos there. And she made for one piano and Dame Mara Hess said, no, not that one, it's that one over there. And apparently Dame Mara Hess had narrow hands and a special piano was made for that. Now, have you ever come across that before, and does it make any difference when you're trying to sort of tune it?
Well, I haven't come across that before, and I wouldn't have thought it would make much difference because the inside of the piano is much the same. You do get differences in the keyboard, though. The extremes are when you play a harpsichord, it's very much different. But in pianos, for instance, you can get thinner or thicker sharps, and they're not absolutely standard.
Did I hear correctly when you said the sounding board was concave?
Yes.
Why is that?
Well,
The question was about the sounding board being concave.
right. So you've got your soundboard, which is actually made like that. It's not flat. And then you put your bridges on top of the soundboard, and then you pull your high tensile steel string over the bridge, and you tune it with the tuning pin, and you pull tension on it. And you've got to remember that modern pianos have an enormous amount of tension. On a Steinway concert grand, for instance, if you cut off all the strings at exactly the same time, it would be a down weight of approximately 20 tons. So just on one string, there's quite a lot of tension. And when you pull this up to pitch, it forces the bridge down a little bit, and this is called the bearing. So it pushes the bridge down, and therefore the concavity of the soundboard down a little bit by a very specific amount, so that the soundboard acts as a diaphragm, and it's the soundboard that pushes the airwaves from the top and from the bottom.
So on an upright, it's not concave. On an upright, it would be flat.
No, all pianos.
Are they?
Yeah. That's the whole design of a piano. They're slightly unflat, so that when the pressure is on, then it's like a diaphragm, and it's moving the air. Because if it was just flat, it wouldn't have quite so much ability to sound.
Yeah, we can go on for another hour.
As I said, it was difficult to pack in all the things in just a small
One of the
time.
most fascinating talks I've heard, and I wish I'd heard it about 60 years ago. Any other final
I
questions?
just wanted to ask, the older pianos were done with ebony and ivory. I don't think the modern pianos they're not constructed the same way, are they?
About the use of ebony and ivory in constructing pianos.
Piano keys.
You're right. A lot of modern pianos, most modern pianos now, are made with the naturals are made from some kind of composite plastic, and the wood of the black keys can still be ebony, and in some cheaper pianos they're actually plastic as well. But the real problem with that is that CITES, which is the body of people who look after animals, and the problem with getting ivory is that it's very difficult now because it's largely banned throughout the world. You can still have an ivory keyboard, but it's going to be difficult to get the ivory and be very, very expensive.
Expensive too.
Mm.
Any final questions? Well, I think we should have this talk every year. I think it's absolutely fascinating. And Next time I hear you tuning, I'll try and hear all these magical beats. Absolutely fascinating. I hope you've enjoyed it elsewhere in the world as much as we have here in St Mary's Perivale. And Michael, you've been such a huge asset to us.
Thank
for
you.
the last 1,000 concerts here, actually 1,100 concerts here, 400 pianists, and another 700 at St Barnabas. So it's been terrific.
Have I still got a job then?
Well, which brings me on to the fact that Michael needs to get paid. We always do pay Michael. He's wonderful.
Really?
So
It's news to me.
if you've enjoyed the talk and you'd like to donate via our PayPal facility on the website, we'd be very grateful indeed. As always, we pay our musicians and our piano tuners. The rest of us are unpaid, but Michael is wonderful, and we owe him a huge amount, which is why we put on this show this afternoon. Thank you for everything, Michael, not just for
Thank
now,
you.
but for the last 30 years. You're a very good pal, and I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
And let's give him a big round of applause. The next concert is in 48 hours' time, where we have Anna Sibileva, who won the Leeds piano competition in 2015. So she's quite some player, playing Beethoven and Brahms. And Michael will be doing his best to make sure this piano is good enough for her, and hearing all the beats. So that's in 48 hours' time. Thank you very much for being with us, and a good afternoon.